G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of Project 100 with sleep scientist Dr. Angela De Rosario. Now, I've only come to truly appreciate the value of a good sleep in recent years, and honestly, I wish I'd have prioritized it a lot sooner. But the old bed at 9, up at 5 routine doesn't always cut it. Body temperature plays a big role in sleep quality, especially during extreme seasons. What's helped me beat those summer sweats and now the winter chills is the 8 Sleep Pod 4 Ultra. It's a clinically tested, science-backed, high-tech mattress cover that's one of a kind, automatically adjusting to your core temperature to keep you sleeping at your best, and it's trusted by top performers around the world. If you want to check it out, head over to www.8sleep.com/project100 and use the code PROJECT100, that's Project 100, to get $350 off your Pod 4 Ultra and take your sleep game to the next level. Now, onto the show. Dr. Angela De Rosario, welcome to Project 100.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much for having me.
It's awesome you're here. I just, your career title, I know how these things can be. They can be very brief, but actually try to describe your career is going to be pretty difficult. But your career titles in my brief here is sleep and circadian research, because this is a sleep episode. It's about sleep, which I'm really interested in. But maybe to kick it off, you could just tell us what your qualifications are. Maybe start off your academic stuff and maybe what you're researching or what type of work you do.
Okay, sure. So undergraduate, applied biological sciences many moons ago.
What is that? What's applied biological sciences?
Well, just the study of how the body works.
Yep.
And that got me interested in the brain. PhD in sleep medicine. That was University of Sydney many years later. And then my sleep training began about 20 years ago. St Thomas's Hospital in London. Had the opportunity to work there. And then came over to Australia 2004. So I've been here for over 20 years now. And I worked as a sleep scientist at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital and started my research career there, really.
So you're still at RPA doing research?
No. So I am at the Woolcock Institute of Medical Research, where the sleep laboratories are, and at Macquarie University. So I lead a program of sleep research at there, and yeah.
What are you researching? It's probably some really small aspect of sleep because sleep covers a lot of territory. But just out of interest, it's probably not that interesting to our audience, but it is to me. What really refined area of research are you working on right now, for example?
2 main programs: sleep and aging. So understanding the links between sleep disturbance and accelerated brain aging. I know you're interested in that, of
Definitely.
course. Also looking at how sleep disorders and sleep loss impact brain function, and understanding how, if you don't get enough good sleep during the night, what the consequences are in the daytime. So how that can potentially intrude into your waking brain and cause a whole host of problems, including fall asleep crashes, for example.
Sometimes, you mean as a microsleep? Is that what that means?
Much more distinct than a microsleep. So
Right.
no, your eyes are open.
Yeah.
You're engaged, but very small areas of your brain, so islands of neurons, are actually falling asleep. And so you will look awake. It's not like microsleep, so it's really obvious, you've got your eyes closed. This is much more discreet than that. And this is a more recent discovery that sleep and wake can coexist. So those are the two kind of broad programs of research.
So and obviously this is a show, but not limited to, but definitely interested in sleep and its relationship with aging, or maybe aging and its relationship with sleep, if I can put it around the other way. Don't know which one comes first. We often, and in terms of, let's call it managing to optimize your life relative to age. In other words, being the healthiest you possibly can and maybe living the longest you possibly can, subject to all the variables. We got nutrition, exercise, and sleep. We've got a few other things, like socialization, etc. But just looking at those three, there is somewhat of a debate, and I've heard different people debate this, that sleep is the most important, and I've heard other people debate that exercise is the most important thing. Nutrition obviously sits in there somewhere, but there's been this debate. Why is sleep so important for optimization? Like, just let's say for people over 50, why is sleep so important? What's it doing for us?
Well, I'm going to be biased and say that all of those, like sleep's the most important, but of course, hand in hand with exercise and nutrition, and both are linked. When we fall asleep, it's time out for us, right, from our busy schedules, and that's important. We don't have to worry about anyone. We don't have to think about anything. We go into a sort of a state of restoration and rejuvenation. That's important no matter what age you are. We know that sleep is important for nearly all physiological processes, from our immune system to our cognition and our thinking. And so that's an area of research that I'm particularly interested in. How we perform and working at our optimum, it's all about our sleep in terms of that sort of fatigue and performance-related optimization. Yeah, I think that sleep is very important for that.
So as you were speaking there, I was thinking about my mother who died from motor neuron disease, and she was probably the worst sleeper I know. So she would go to bed at 10, wake up at 12. Invariably, she'd be awake from 12 till she'd try everything, warm milk, cup of tea, whatever, everything, not cup of tea, but like warm milk, and watch television or not watch television, read a book. She just tried everything, but it went on forever. But then she'd go back to sleep maybe about 3. Then she'd maybe sleep for 2 or 3 hours, and she'd be up, and then she'd be doing her day. And she did this until the age of 86. And but she ended up getting a motor neuron disease. And I often wondered whether it was her dreadful sleeping patterns that contributed to a brain disease. What would you consider to be an optimized amount of sleep? In other words, are we talking 8 hours, 7 hours, 6 hours? I'm sure it's individualized, but overall, generally.
Yeah, most people need 7 to 8 hours of sleep.
Continuous?
Ideally, but not necessarily. So that's an important point, in that if you have a nap and then you can't sleep at night, it's because you kind of had that nap, or you had the nap too late, or the nap was too long. So the napping can sometimes take away the drive to sleep. But 7 to 8 hours, most people. However, not everybody. So I think that this is part of the problem, in that out there sensationalized, you must get 7 to 8 hours sleep or you're in trouble. And some people are okay on fewer hours, and some people need a little bit more. I think when it gets to the extremes of very short sleep and very long sleep, that's a different issue. But typically, 6 to 9 hours, somewhere in between that, is okay. And if you are having a nap in the daytime, you can count that as your 24-hour sleep. That's okay. I think you just have to know how that's going to impact your nighttime sleep and be okay with that. So have some realistic kind of expectations and understanding of what that means for your nighttime sleep if you're sleeping in the day.
So when I go to, we have these this so-called circadian rhythm, which probably is different for everybody, but generally speaking, say for someone like me, I could go to sleep at night any time from 8:30 on. I try to stay awake to 9:30, but let's say I can actually go to sleep for any time from 8:30 on, assuming in my case that haven't eaten late, haven't had anything to drink, haven't been stimulated with conversation, didn't go to the football and watch my team win or lose. And I've got like this 3-hour break between, well, not 8, so not 3 hours, maybe 2-hour break between my last activity, call it, and the time I go to sleep. And then I can sleep for 4 hours, and then I wake up. Usually you've got to go to the bathroom, and then you go back, then I go back to sleep. And I wake up pretty early. And sometimes I've got all these devices I wear, and sometimes I'll look at it and it'll say, well, your total sleep time was, let's call it 8 hours, but your REM sleep how they calculate it, I don't know. But your REM sleep was 1.5 hours, 1.5 hours, and your deep sleep was 1.5 hours, and the rest of it was light sleep. Now, I know I slept light because I normally sleep light anyway, but I know I slept light. But I look at that and I think, oh my God, is there a recommended or a generally accepted amount of REM sleep and deep sleep versus light sleep? And is light sleep of any value to me at all? Should I just not bother about it? I just don't understand that information. Why and what does REM sleep do, and what does deep sleep do? What's the difference between the three of them?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that at the beginning of that, when you explained all of your healthy sleeping habits, that's great. In
Only
terms
recently.
Very good. So you're doing all the right things there. The typical amount, the makeup of our sleep, if I talk about proportions, so maybe 75% is non-REM sleep, 20 to 25% is REM sleep. And then you've got some wake in there. So first of all, bit of wake, completely normal. Waking up to go to the toilet, normal as well. And that non-REM sleep is made up of light non-REM sleep and then deep sleep. And so you mentioned REM and deep sleep. What's most important? Well, I guess the short answer is all of it. And light sleep is important because what happens during light non-REM sleep is your brain, very active during sleep. There's particular brain waves that are occurring, and those brain waves, they're called spindles. They help with memory consolidation and cognitive processes during sleep.
During your light sleep?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So the light sleep is just as equally important. Now, you'll get researchers that only look at REM or only look at slow wave sleep, and they'll each argue that slow wave sleep, very important.
That's deep sleep, is it?
Deep sleep,
right.
Growth hormone secreted, repair, restoration. We think that that's also when the brain cleans out all the toxins that accumulate, their lymphatic system.
So during slow waves, deep sleep,
which is slow wave sleep.
Right.
So they're really big, high amplitude slow waves. If we were to record your brain activity with EEG, we'd see these really big slow waves. So that kind of sleep is linked with lots of important functions. REM sleep, if we record your brain activity, if I didn't see that your eyes were moving or that you lose your muscle tone during REM, so you can't act out your dreams, your brain activity looks like wake. So very different type of brain activity that's occurring. Now, REM sleep, important for laying down memories as well, different types of memories, and also regulating our mood. So every aspect of sleep is important. Going back to the devices, now so many wearables, nearables, measures that monitor your sleep. And this is fine if you take it with a kind of pinch of salt. But if you're constantly looking at that information and that's feeding some kind of anxiety around your sleep, it's not good, because it creates a problem when it's not really there. And so when we measure sleep, gold standard, something called polysomnography, we are measuring the brain activity. And it's only that can accurately define whether you're in light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. So without that, if mattress under the bed, great, they're using other physiological signals. But that staging of sleep, you've got to just know that those devices are great for sleep time, for example, but the sleep stages, I wouldn't rely on that. I wouldn't worry about that.
So if I'm just in REM sleep, then
yeah,
which stands for rapid eye movement, as I understand.
Yes.
Why is my eyes actually moving rapidly? I mean,
yeah.
What is that like? And what's making my eyes move quickly? Because my eyes are closed, my eyelids are closed.
Yeah.
Why are my eyes moving quickly during rapid eye movement?
It's a characteristic of REM sleep. So the idea really being that you're processing information during REM sleep, your eyes moving, but your muscles not moving keeps you safe during REM sleep. So we're looking at electrical activity of the eyes. There's two types of REM sleep, phasic and tonic. Phasic is where you have the rapid eye movements, but tonic is when you're not. So not all REM sleep has rapid eye movement. But what characterises all of REM sleep is that loss of muscle tone.
Which means my body's like dead.
Yeah, you can't
completely comatose.
Yeah, apart from your breathing, you are not moving.
Yeah. So obviously your brain and your heart's going, and your lungs are going, but the rest of it's nothing's going on. And is that the bit of sleep? When you first go to sleep and you twitch a little bit. Is that period?
Yeah. So hypnagogic and hypnopompic, they're jerks that occur when you're either falling asleep or wake up from sleep. I used to be a shift worker, and sometimes when you're sleeping out of sync of your circadian rhythm, you have these kind of crossover of sleep stages. And, I mentioned before that sleep and wake can coexist, but different sleep stages can intrude into wakefulness. And this can happen when you're waking up from sleep. So sometimes you might wake up from sleep, but you can't move.
Yeah, I've had that during the day.
Yeah, during the day.
Like literally, I can't wake up.
Yeah. So this again is that the idea shifting in the field anyway, or the understanding of sleep, is that sleep-wake is more of a continuum rather than you're either awake or you're asleep. And if you are asleep, you're either in non-REM or you're in REM. So it's much more fluid now. And some of these experiences that you mentioned are point towards that.
So rapid eye movement, as I understand it too, doesn't just actually happen in one chunk. It sort of happens over the period you're asleep. I always sort of but I was looking at something else and just sort of looking up stuff for today. And I just assume like when you go to sleep, you have REM for, hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is. Then you go into deep. But that's not how it works. It sort of can be spread out over the whole 8 hours or whatever it is that you're asleep for. Is that correct?
That's right. And
do you dream during that period? Is that when you got rapid eye movement, is that your dreaming period, or do you dream the whole time?
You dream more so in REM sleep, but you can dream in non-REM sleep. And you're absolutely right. So when you fall asleep, you sleep in cycles every 90 minutes. So when you fall asleep, you'll go into non-REM sleep, light sleep, and then you'll transition to deep sleep or slow wave sleep. You'll come back to light sleep, and then you'll go to REM sleep, 90 minutes. And you'll have 4 to 6 of those cycles through the night. And so the first cycles of sleep, first part of the night, very rich in slow wave sleep, deep sleep, restorative sleep. So the brain kind of takes what it needs first in terms of that restoration of deep sleep. And the REM sleep is short. And then that flips around. So there's more REM sleep in the second half of the night towards when you wake up. And the REM sleep gets longer. So there's still that every 90 minutes, you've got these cycles, but the makeup of that 90 minutes changes, which is why sometimes if you wake up out of REM sleep, you might remember your dream, or you might get that experience where you've got that muscle atonia, but your brain is waking up slowly and hasn't quite caught up with it.
I've definitely experienced that. In terms of optimization of your sleep patterns, including all those things you just talked about, light, REM, deep, or non-REM, light and deep. Yep. Is there such a thing that I can build up a sleep debt? In other words, let's say I got to work really late tonight, and I miss out on one of those 4 to 6 cycles of 90 minutes between the 3 stages of sleep. And let's say I miss out on 2 of those cycles. In other words, I'm only asleep for 4 or 5 hours. And because I went to bed late at work, whatever it happened to be, and then I had to get up early because I had to be at work early, for example, which often happens to me. Have I built up a sleep debt? Is there such a thing as a sleep debt? In other words, I owe myself a bigger sleep, and then I can recover it the next night. Is that such a thing? Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely, it's a thing. So sleep is regulated by 2 processes. One is a homeostatic process, whereby the pressure to sleep builds the longer you've been awake. So you stay awake beyond your usual bedtime, 8:30, 9:30. That sleep pressure is going to continue to build until you go to sleep. And dissipate that pressure. So absolutely, like the longer you stay awake, the more pressure there is to sleep. When you finally go to sleep, what will happen is that, again, the brain kind of takes what it needs in terms to recover. So you'll see more deep, slow wave sleep in your recovery sleep. And
so if I could just interrupt for a second, because you're sleeping for a shorter period, somehow your body knows to go and get more deep sleep. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So it's a marker that the depth of sleep is a marker of how long you've been awake. So if we think about sleep deprivation or sleep restriction experiments, and we've kept people awake for 24 hours, 40 hours in the sleep lab, that when you allow someone to go to sleep and recover, you will see a matching response in the depth of sleep. So your slow waves, those big high amplitude brain waves, much, much higher. There's more of them. And that is a correlate, a physiological correlate of sleep pressure. If you flip that around and you take a nap and you take away some of that sleep pressure that's been building in the day, you won't be able to go to sleep. So this is, going back to that issue of understanding about how sleep works and what the processes are that regulate sleep. The other factor is the circadian rhythm. So the second process is the circadian rhythm. And so both sleep pressure and circadian rhythm need to be at the right point for you to be able to sleep.
Sort of aligned.
They have to be aligned, because the reason why you don't fall asleep at 7:30 or you're having your dinner, even though your sleep pressure, you've been awake since 5 or whatever time you wake up, very high, that sleep pressure, you're almost at the point where you need to go to sleep, but you've got an alerting signal from your circadian rhythm. And that alerting signal is counteracting your sleep pressure. But when that circadian alerting signal dips, so it's the darkness and melatonin that trigger that, then you've got high sleep pressure, you've got low alerting signal, now you can go to sleep.
So I guess everybody's different. Is there like genetic differences between for some people's circadian rhythms? Because we're talking about aligning things.
Yeah.
And if your circadian rhythm, perhaps, I don't know, tell me if I'm right. If you're the sort of person who's a circadian rhythm, I don't know if it's genetically or socially engineered through how you grew up, is like for midnight. Once you go to sleep at midnight, that's not me, but let's say that is someone else. And so my question is that circadian rhythm to go to bed at midnight in some other people's situation genetically built, or is it sort of socially developed, or both, perhaps?
Yeah, both, really. So genetics play a part in that. You can be, a morning person, an evening person. And there is a role for genetic circadian genes that modulate that internal rhythm and the body clock. All of our cells have a clock as well. It governs pretty much all of our, again, physiological process, very important.
All of our cells, not just our brain cells.
Yep.
All the cells in my body.
Have a circadian rhythm. So there's an optimum time for all of your organs, all of your cells in your body to work and do what they do, whether that's about immune system or whether that's about feeding, behavior or alertness or cognition. But there's a master clock. It's in the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it's this that governs all of those peripheral clocks. So that master clock receives light and dark signals.
From, I guess, through your eyes?
Through your eyes, exactly. And then the dark signals, say, produce melatonin. And that melatonin then gets released, and that sort of promotes sleep. And then the light in the morning tells the brain to stop producing that melatonin. So dark and light are really, really important for regulating your circadian rhythm. Genetics play a part in that and determining when that happens, whether you like to go to bed early and you like to be a morning, you're a morning person, or the other way around. And then same with the sleep pressure or your brain activity during sleep. I mentioned about slow wave activity being a correlate, brain activity correlate of sleep pressure. And so our EEG patterns or our brain activity patterns are kind of like our fingerprint as well. And so if I was to say, hey, Mark, would you come into the sleep lab for 2 different nights? And I record your sleep, your brain activity, your patterns, your profiles would be really, they'd be this similar on both nights. But if I was to compare you to somebody else, quite different. So there is genetic makes up a big part of that, but the social factors. So if you have exposure to light, if you suppress the release of melatonin, if you're a shift worker, you've finished night shift and you don't wear sunglasses on the way home, you allow light to come into your eyes, it's going to be hard to try and fall asleep again, because you've got to try and trick your body when you're working against your environment. So both things really important.
So how do you, let's call it, trick your brain in relation to light? So are we talking about use of devices? Because there's a lot written about, I think it's blue light stimulation from devices, these sorts of things, mobile phones, probably TVs, I guess, computer, laptops, etc. Is that the light that our brain's receiving, that's sort of tricking our circadian rhythm into saying, well, it's still daytime? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So some people put these glasses on with a red lens on it. Does that actually negate that or neutralize that effect?
Yeah. So that can block the alerting effects of bright light. And then the flip side of that is, if you need to realign your circadian rhythm, you might want to expose yourself to light in the early morning. And so you would go outside, without your sunglasses in the morning, get a bit of light. That sort of helps. Or in the northern hemisphere, like England, where it can be very dark in the morning, you can sit in front of a light box and get that light.
There's such a thing?
Yeah. Yes.
It's called a light box?
Yes.
It's not like these sort of lights?
No, it's a little box. So you'd put it, when you were having your breakfast in the morning, you'd just put it on the table, and it would give you the light that you would have if you lived in a sunnier climate. Of course, there's other devices now, so glasses that you can wear that emit alerting blue light. And so that can be used if you're traveling time zones, realigned of jet lag, or it can just help realign your kind of circadian rhythm, particularly if you're working out of sync.
So, because that circadian rhythm, everyone keeps talking about it, and I just trying to work out in terms of light. So, the circadian rhythm is it just light? By the way, is there any other senses that get alerted, say in the morning, apart from sunlight or daylight? Are there any other senses? Is it warmer, colder? Is there anything that our skin notices? Do we receive the light anywhere else apart from our eyes? Anywhere on our skin, for example?
No. So eyes.
Just our eyes?
Yeah.
So are there any other things that we might sense that will tell us? I mean, I hear the birds in the morning. That actually wakes me up. There's kookaburras around my house, and they get up before the light comes up, before the daylight comes up. They're the first birds to get up and have a laugh. And they actually wake me up.
Yeah.
Before any daylight there, especially in the higher part of summer, like around 22nd of December, when it's light at 5 o'clock in the morning. But the birds wake me up before that. Are my ears playing a role?
Oh, I mean, that's lovely that the birds wake you up. But light's the most potent stimulator, but things that are also important in training your circadian rhythm or readjusting it if you've traveled time zones would be when you eat, when you have breakfast, and when you exercise as well. So all of those things help your body think, right, okay, it's time to get going now. But light is the thing that can manipulate it, the most potent,
So when the light gets received in my brain, into my eye, I should say, which I guess is part of my brain, and the sends a signal back to, I don't know, maybe it's the hypothalamus or something.
It's the pineal gland.
The pineal gland, okay. That sends a message to something else, as I understand it, to release something like cortisol into my system.
Well, the other way around. So cortisol goes down,
I'm
melatonin goes up.
In the morning.
In the morning.
Yeah, first thing in the morning. So
yes.
The sun, let's call it the sun coming up.
Yes.
And let's say I got a window facing east and the sun comes right on me and I don't have blinds and it shines on my face. The process is that so the pineal gland is for melatonin, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So like in the morning, there's some other gland that must release something into some other gland to release goal into your system. Is that what happens?
Maybe. Yes, it does. And so the light sensitive cells in your eyes send a signal to the CSN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then sends a signal to suppress or release melatonin. And then there's other temperature is regulated as well. And then cortisol is also regulated and other hormones too. And all of those kind of work in synchrony to say, okay.
Time to get up.
Time to wake up. Yeah, we're ready to go. I mean, the cortisol thing is interesting, right? It's the sort of stress hormone and thought to be quite high in people with insomnia that struggle to fall asleep and don't have that dampening, of that sort of.
That's why if someone's
hormone.
anxious or stressed at night, they're not going to get to sleep.
Exactly right. And so allowing that 2 to 3 hours, like you do, wind down, have some time rather than going to bed just on full go is sort of really important to do that.
And it's not just stress, it's not actual like, I'm stressed out or I'm really anxious about something and I'm worried about. It can be. But the cortisol can be flush around your system at night if you, like in my case, go to watch my football team and we might be losing or winning. And even if we're winning, I can get equally excited. So the cortisol gets released even if you're excited. And then it sort of sits in your system for a bit. It doesn't just come and go like that. So that's why I find, like, if I go to the footy and I get home 10 at night, it takes me a couple of hours, especially if we win, it takes me a couple of hours to get to sleep because I got to get rid of that cortisol and I've got to sort of somehow get my circadian rhythm back into thing. I've got to release melatonin and all that sort of stuff. The body's going, whoa, what the fuck is going on here? How do I turn this around? In that, there's nothing wrong with it though, where there is it. Because sometimes I think to myself, that wasn't a good sleep, Mark, you had last night because you got too excited when you come home from the football. You didn't get a good night's sleep. There's nothing really damaging in that regard. I mean, it'd be different if I did it every night of the week, but I do it once a week, for example, once a fortnight.
Yeah, no, I think it's about having realistic expectations about our sleep, knowing that from time to time we're going to have some difficulty sleeping for whatever reason it is, or we might wake up or we might have some worries for that particular time. And I think just knowing that that's okay and that's normal and not getting yourself stuck in a bit of a rut about that because you don't want to get to the point where you're worried about going to bed or that you've trained yourself to be awake in bed. You know, you don't want that. You want to be a good sleeper. And you want to be confident about going to sleep and the goodness that it can do for you and not get yourself worried about sleep. So again, coming back to that, how the information that we now have access to doesn't lead us down the path of being overly worried. And all of the things that we hear about, we're sleeping less and society, we're not prioritizing sleep, and I think
makes it worse.
It makes it worse. And this, I must have 8 hours. Well, you might not. You might be one of those people that's absolutely fine, and you've got to listen. You've got to think about how you feel the next day and whether that's right for you. You know that you can recover sleep.
You can recover. So the next night you can pick it up.
Yeah, you can do that. So there's some very elegant experiments where they sleep deprive people for 4 nights. 4 hours for 7 nights,
right,
or 14 nights, for example, and then 6 hours, then 8 hours. And they look at kind of the dose response of sleep deprivation and then the recovery. how many nights sleep does it take to recover so you're back to baseline after you've had chronic sleep restriction, which you might have if you've had a really busy week or if you're adjusting to something where you're just not able to get
travel.
Yeah, exactly right. And you just need to be aware that there's a cumulative effect of that in terms of your performance. So if you're used to having 8 hours and you function really well at 8, and then now you're having 4 hours, that's going to build and build. But the good news is you can recover it. You might need 2 8-hour or 10-hour sleep opportunities to do that, but experimentally, I mean, it's in the sleep lab, it's all kind of artificial, but that you can return back to baseline. And I think we all know that if we've had a bad night's sleep and we sleep well the next night, we're, fully charged again and back to normal. I mean, I think that the interesting thing, there was a study looking at people, this whole kind of concept that we should be having 8 hours, and that there's a problem now that we're not sleeping as well as what we used to 20, 50 years ago, certainly before artificial electricity was introduced into our homes and disrupted everything. And there was this lovely study where they looked at people who didn't have electricity. So in Africa, Central America, I think Tanzania, Bolivia, one other place. And so the average duration of sleep in those pre-industrialized communities, if you like, 6.4 hours. And then an extra hour during winter. So all of this kind of, this worry, I think we need to balance, and we need to think everyone's different, and not know that for ourselves how we feel. If you have a genuine sleep complaint, of course you absolutely need to go and see a sleep specialist, but waking up is normal. We don't all need 8 hours, and that this kind of scaring, I think we've just got to measure that with the evidence.
Would you be able to sketch out for me though where it would be considered chronic or acute sleep patterns? Chronically bad, acutely bad. What are we talking about? Someone who wakes every hour, or someone who only managed to get 3 hours? Is there sort of like a baseline for where it's? If someone's listening to this and I don't want them to walk away and think, oh well, it's okay, I don't sleep properly at night. Well, is there a point at which they should go and seek help?
Yeah, I think if they're having chronic problems, falling asleep, maintaining their sleep, and that's affecting them in terms of their daytime function at work.
How are they not affecting them though?
Fatigue, irritability, mood, all of those things, and that's not right. Need to seek help. So 1 in 10 Australians has a sleep disorder, and we shouldn't forget that. So I'm kind of talking about the boundaries of normal sleep physiology. Yep. Typically, if you look at associations between extreme sleepers, very short sleepers, very long sleepers, less than 5 hours, less than 10, or sort of more than 10, more than 12, those kind of extremes, that's sort of unusual.
That's indicative.
And those have been linked with poor health outcomes. Right. And poor brain health outcomes as well.
Both sides, both long and short, yeah.
Exactly. But if you're in that middle bit, like most of us are, and then you've got to think about what is it that's causing that sleep disruption or those problems with your sleep. Has someone said that you snore? Are you waking up with a dry mouth, a headache? Have you noticed a change in your mood? All of those things could be indicative of a sleep disorder that can be treated and turn things around for you. So understanding that, dispelling the myths about sleep, understanding how sleep's regulated and what we can do ourselves to manage our sleep, making sure we go to bed when we feel sleepy and that sleep pressure is high and the alerting signal is low. There's no point thinking, I had a really bad night last night, I'm going to go to bed at 7 or 8, because your alerting signal is going to be high, and then you're going to get yourself all stressed out because you can't fall asleep again. So you've got to have that understanding about that, but also follow up on any indication that you might have a sleep problem chronically, because then that becomes has massive impacts on how you're feeling and what you're able to do, short-term and long-term consequences.
G'day guys, Mike Boris here. Now, if you're a regular listener, you'll know I'm always looking for ways to stay at my best whether that's through training, recovery, or just making sure I can back up day after day. With my current regime, one of the simplest ways I can make steps towards that goal is by using bulk nutrients BCAA recovery. That's branch chain amino acids. BCAAs are scientifically backed to reduce muscle soreness, speed up your recovery, and, keep you feeling fresh after a tough session. Whether I'm coming from the gym, boxing, or just pushing through the daily grind, these aminos help me show up again tomorrow. And that's the most important thing for me. And the best part, it's made in-house right here in Australia. Head to bulknutrients.com.au and check out their limited edition purple grape flavour out now. As we get older, and I don't know what older means, it could be 50, 60, 70, 80, but does our capacity or does our need for sleep diminish? In other words, we hear stories about older people don't need as much sleep. Is that true? And if it's true, why is it so?
Yeah, it's interesting. So our sleep changes as we get older.
How does that mean? How do you mean?
So we tend to sleep less. We have less slow wave sleep. We have more lighter sleep. There's more sleep fragmentation. So there's more
sleep
fragmentation.
Which means?
So it's fragmented. It's disrupted. You wake more.
Yep.
And those periods of wakefulness are longer. So that we know that happens, part of the normal aging process, just like our skin changes or our hearing changes, that sleep changes. And then some of those brain waves, the brain activity that I mentioned before, the spindles and the slow waves, those that have been linked with cognitive or the functional processes of sleep, they also diminish. And so with the advances of how we can measure sleep and measure the brain during sleep, we're trying to understand more about what those brain changes mean in terms of brain health, accelerated brain aging, and whether, of course, then we can target those changes, boost, enhance those aspects of sleep that we know diminish with aging, to ultimately improve how we function and our brain health. So if you're considered at risk for developing dementia, if you have mild cognitive impairment, or for all of the dementias, sleep disturbance is really commonly reported. Huge problem.
Is that are you saying that I've got to get this right now. If you have any indicator, could be familial, in relation, like genetically, in an indicator for dementia of any type, because there's lots of different types of dementia, but let's call it, I don't know, what a vascular dementia is one of those. If you have any indication in your history, familiar, or maybe you had received a lot of head trauma, for example, if you're a boxer or you're a UFC fighter or a rugby league player or something like that, are you saying that you might not have any symptoms, but if all of a sudden you stop sleeping well and start sleeping badly, does that then sort of inform you guys that that particular patient or that particular individual might be heading down towards dementia or might be getting towards Alzheimer's or having some cognitive impairment? Or does it work the other way? Because you've got cognitive impairment, because you've got dementia, you don't sleep well? Or is it both?
It's both.
Yeah, sorry.
It's so bidirectional.
Yeah.
If you have dementia, you have sleep disturbance. If you have sleep disturbance or sleep disorders, you are more likely to develop dementia. So the evidence is suggesting that, for example, if you have sleep disordered breathing, you have 26% higher risk.
As in sleep apnea, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, as an example.
Obstructive sleep apnea, of developing cognitive impairment. If you have sleep disordered breathing, as in sleep apnea, you have mild cognitive impairment, formal diagnosis of a decade earlier than if you didn't have sleep disorder breathing.
It sort of makes sense.
72 for 80, exactly. So when you think about what that might mean for the brain.
Because I'm not getting enough nutrition and oxygen into the brain.
When we think that the dips in oxygen is the biggest
And
contributing
neurons might die off
there.
or something.
Pardon?
And neurons might die off or just over time diminish.
Not working so well. Yeah. Exactly. So there's that aspect of sleep disturbance, sleep disorders conferring a greater risk of developing dementia. I mean, I think what you were also talking about was that what are the early markers? By the time we see a cognitive impairment, a cognitive symptom, someone's not functioning well, it's a bit too late.
Yeah.
If you look at other brain-based indicators, accumulation of beta amyloid, the toxic metabolite that builds up, makes plaques in the brain.
For Alzheimer's
or tau pathology, but they're occurring 10, 20 years earlier before the symptoms appear. So what we're trying to understand is whether changes to sleep, brain activity, neurophysiology, so those reductions in slow waves that are linked with the clearance of, clearing out the brain, the housekeeper of all the toxic stuff, like exactly. The spindle's important for laying down our memories and helping us retain what we learn, whether those are early indicators of conversion to dementia, poorer cognitive outcomes. So that's kind of where the field is.
So that's like one step before someone going into doing whatever it is they do, where they see what your amyloids or whatever.
PET, you mean?
It's one step. It's like years before. You can sort of say, listen, Mark, your sleep, your disturbed sleep or your lack of sleep, they're different things, could have both,
yep.
Could well lay down some sort of marker that over time you might get some diminution in your cognitive ability, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or any other thing. And therefore, how it takes us right back to the beginning. We got to somehow we got to sort of self-diagnose ourselves as to how well we sleep and what are we looking for. So, like, let's say as a 50-year-old man or 50-year-old woman or 60-year-old, etc., what are they looking for in terms of what you just described? And let's say, by the way, that in the family they've got one or two uncles and aunties or whatever got dementia. So there's maybe some genetic linkage. What are they sort of looking for as signs that they should be careful and perhaps go and consult with somebody? What are they thinking about? What's going through their head? What should go through their head?
Well, I guess what I'm kind of saying is that we're trying to understand the risk factors or the predictors, the biomarkers, much, much earlier than that, before someone's experiencing the sleep disturbance.
Or even before that, you're going
before that. So
right.
So imagine we can screen, we can scan, we already can record brain activity. We can record it from the whole brain, and we go, okay, if you've got deficits in slow waves or a loss of spindles in this particular region of the brain, there's a problem here. We've got to intervene.
How would I know to come see you about that though? How would I know if I'm a person listening to this? I better go and see these guys because they should test this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful that we could offer such a, I mean, that we're quite far away from doing that.
We're still researching this.
Exactly. So what are the markers? Importantly, it doesn't just stop there, right? Because if you think that something is indicating a risk factor, we say, okay, we've got to step in here. Can we move that marker? Can we improve what your trajectory, what your cognitive trajectory might be so that you've got 10 more years of good quality life? And so it's more about whether we can manipulate. So it comes back to kind of sleep engineering. Can we boost that activity in the brain? Can we focus in, localize that abnormality? Can we reverse it? And then does that have a knock-on effect? So that's the evidence that we're trying to build, and we're doing some of that at the moment. Neuromodulation, we're stimulating the brain non-invasively. Can we boost those slow waves that push out those toxins? Can we? Well, in principle, we can. Yes.
Well, with electrical inputs or something zapping me.
Yeah, and we're running, patients at the moment and participants at the moment looking at this. So it's about building the evidence, because it's very hard to cause and effect, right? It's ethically unsound if you try and bring about a neurodegenerative process by constantly perturbing someone's sleep, right? Ethics committee ain't going to let you do that, because that's going to be, the consequences might be grave for that person.
Danger, yeah.
But you can flip it the other way around. And
if they've already got it.
Yeah, you've got the sleep disorder, or that you're cognitively intact and you're healthy, but you're interested, you want to come in and participate, and we're going to go the other way around. We're going to boost your slow waves, and we're going to see if it improves the clearance of toxic metabolites, if we, improves your memory consolidation. So those are some of the things that we can.
How do you boost my slow waves? I mean, it's sort of a bit of a non sequitur, boosting slow waves, because they're slow by definition. But how do you increase my slow wave?
Yes.
What do you do? Do you mind sharing this?
No, please.
What do you do?
You're welcome to come into the lab.
I am going to come into the lab. I am coming into the lab.
But
what do you do? Like, give me an injection, or is it chemicals, or is it some electrical thing you got around my head?
Yeah, you just put a cap on.
Yep.
And we send electrical signals through your scalp.
While I'm asleep or awake?
While you're asleep.
Yeah.
So we've been trialing this during sleep. Of course, many electrical brain stimulation is used for treatment of depression, right, during wakefulness. The therapeutic potential there is well acknowledged in some disorders.
Is this TMS?
That's TMS, but this isn't TMS.
Right.
This is called TDCS. So it specifically sends a signal, an electrical signal at the same frequency as your slow wave, and sort of jumps on it and makes it bigger, amplifies.
Puts more energy into it.
Yeah, exactly right. Electrical energy. And so that's really exciting. And so we're trialing that, because though we can treat some sleep disorders, particularly sleep apnea, CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure therapy, gold standard treatment, but not everyone can tolerate it. And so what do we do for the people with sleep apnea that they just can't wear their CPAP mask? We need other approaches to protect the brain. And so one of them is using pharmacology. So some drugs boost sleep spindles. And we're also just completed a study looking at that. So if you can boost your sleep spindles, does that confer an increased memory benefit? So we're engineering, we're manipulating sleep in that way to try and get to the bottom of what can we do about it, with all these changes that happen with aging, with those changes that are even more marked or further exacerbated if you're at risk for developing dementia, which was the point that I was trying to make before, that if you're at greater risk of developing dementia, the changes in sleep that I explained that are normal, everyone experiences, are more prominent. And so if we can detect that early, we can potentially intervene. This would be, the future, hopefully, of trying to do something about that.
And we did have an episode on the show with Professor Matthew Kinn from Neuro, where Matthew talked about dementia, and he in particular talked about vascular dementia, where you might have a blockage in your carotid arteries, which creates a situation where you don't get enough blood flow into your brain, and as a result of that, over time, your brain cells, your neurons don't receive enough oxygen, nutrition, everything else that they're supposed to get. Not so much the clearing out process, but just that process, and dementia, vascular dementia can set in over time. And then, of course, his response was, if you can, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So in other words, make sure the blockage isn't there, and you do that by eating well and living well and exercising well and all those sorts of things. You won't have this vascular. You're less likely to have this vascular dementia, or you'll have a lesser progression of such a dementia that happened at a slower rate or over a longer period of time. In your brain, when all your cells, all your neurons are all sort of connected to each other and are all sort of talking to each other, and over time they're dying off. Are they naturally dying off, irrespective of anything that might be blocking in there? Are they just dying off because they're old? Like we're just getting old. we shrink and our cartilage reduces and we stop producing that amount of cartilage between our bones. And as a result of that, we get shorter and less this way, hopefully not more this way, but those things are natural consequences of aging.
Mm.
Is it fair to say then, therefore, as you age, your brain will get your brain cells, the neurons and everything else that's going on in there, you'll get less of. And as a result of that, over time, you will sleep less anyway because you've got less need to clear it out. There's less, there's less stress. There's less pressure on the things that are in there because there's less of them. I can imagine someone 150. I don't know if anyone's ever made that. Allegedly, Abraham got there. But let's say at 150, you're going to have so many less brain cells, unless someone comes up with some great invention, that you probably won't need that much sleep.
Yeah.
Is that sort of? I mean, I'm giving a ridiculous example, but is that why we sleep less as we get older?
Yeah. Look, I think it's an interesting concept because this comes back to that. We sleep less as we get older, but is that so bad?
That's what I'm saying. Maybe it's not so bad.
It's not. It's just part of normal, and that's sort of part of the message that I'm trying to get across. Just normal.
Yeah.
And the sleep. So older people are more resilient to the effects of sleep restriction or sleep deprivation.
Is that right?
And the thought is that build-up of sleep pressure that happens in everyone is less prominent in older compared to younger people, and therefore, they're either their brain is adapted, they're better able to respond, there's more cognitive reserve, their brains are all connected that they can respond without using the same amount of energy as a younger brain. Lots of different theories of which way to look at it. Is it good? Is it bad? But that loss of slow wave sleep might also just be because that, just like with lots of things in our body, that sleep homeostatic process just starts to dampen down. Now, you would then think, okay, you need less sleep to recover. But what does that mean? Is your brain more efficient? Or is it just that you've got less time, less depth of sleep to repair all those cells, and that eventually you're going to start losing them? And I mean, that's the case for dementia, but I'm not sure. I mean, there's not that many experiments that have really examined this, and certainly not looking at the recovery sleep and slow wave sleep with whole brain measures, which we can do now in older and younger people. And I think that would be, a fascinating experiment just to understand that the resilience in aging, or the lower sleep pressure and the need to sleep less, or the fact that we sleep less, is just part of the biological process. So it might not be a bad thing.
Not something you should worry too much about.
Not something you should
worry
too
natural.
much
It's
about.
sort of more natural.
Yeah.
It's a natural part. It's a natural part of the process of aging.
Yes, I think so. And I think that the literature or the research around older people not having as many performance errors, or when they're tested on these tasks of performance after sleep deprivation, that their brains are kind of, they're better able to...
A bit more resilient.
Yeah, better able to respond. They know what brain areas they've got to recruit. They're been tried and tested, and there's some evidence of that for sleep apnea as well. Like a little bit of sleep apnea, a little bit of hypoxia is good because you can adapt. Your brain can adapt to it.
Hypoxia meaning that you're not getting enough oxygen.
But yeah, exactly. And that your brain is strengthened because of that. It's better able to respond. It's a bit like, I guess, muscle training or
memory.
Yeah, exactly. That, but of course, there becomes a point where we're really concerned about severe dips in oxygen level that we see in people with severe sleep apnea. We know then that can cause a whole cascade of events, neurodegenerative processes that we're concerned about, neuroinflammation, and that's been linked to one of the potential pathways by which severe sleep disordered breathing confers that greater risk of accelerated brain aging.
How do we know if we're not getting enough oxygen whilst we're sleeping? So let's say we're a good sleeper. That is meaning that we don't really have we don't wake up and stuff like that. We sleep the whole night for argument's sake. How do we know if we're not getting enough oxygen? And not in a severe case like sleep apnea where someone's got to wear one of those CPAP masks. Actually, we had a senior leadership team for one of my other businesses retreat last week, and one of my guys actually carries his machine everywhere with him, and it's only a small sort of thing, and he's not that old; he's only in his 50s, but he swears that by it. He says that his ability to function the next day is like 100% better than what it was.
Yep.
And he even thought he did sleep properly, but he didn't realize that he wasn't sleeping properly. But if we just park sleep apnea where you need a mask, how do we know if we're getting enough oxygen just as a general person, just generally speaking? I mean, is there a symptom the next day that we're not getting enough oxygen during our sleep?
I mean, the easiest way to measure is something like an oximeter, a probe that you can put on your finger that measures
overnight
your blood oxygen levels. Finger probes. So we can use those. But
they're pretty easy to buy. You buy them in the chemist.
Yeah.
There's just a little thing with a little light on it.
Yeah, the thing that they put on if you're in the ambulance or hospital or whatever. But you will be getting enough oxygen, because if you haven't got sleep apnea, you've got lots of chemoreceptors, you've got mechanisms in your body, even when you're sleeping, that will make sure that you wake up, even if you have a pause in breathing. Like if you have sleep apnea, your oxygen levels will only dip to a certain point, and then everything will go, hey, you've got to wake up.
Take a deep breath.
You need to, we need to activate your muscles. We need to get that tone back. So that will happen. To protect
naturally,
you.
But let's say we don't get to that
in the
stage.
Morning
I was going to say headache,
classic sort of symptom.
Yeah.
But I think generally speaking that a healthy older person wouldn't not get enough oxygen unless perhaps they had a respiratory disorder or compromised lung function, and then they'd know about that, with breathlessness and
Because you mentioned something before about having a dry mouth when you wake up.
Yes.
I notice that'll happen to me if I sleep on my back.
Yep.
Whereas, is dry mouth an indicator of anything? And one, and two, is there a better way to sleep on your side or your back, or on your stomach even? Some people I know sleep on the stomach, but kids do.
Yeah. So on your back, you tend to have more weight when you're sleeping. So you can tend to snore more on your back. And if you have sleep apnea, some people have positional sleep apnea. They only have it when they're on their back. When they're on their side, they haven't got that weight or indeed just gravity pushing everything down. So snoring often makes you wake with a dry mouth, unless, of course, you've had a heavy night on the booze or something like that. But, and then you can wake with a dry mouth too.
But there's no research that says sleeping on your side is preferable in terms of getting a better night, in terms of slow waves and all the other stuff, deep sleep, REM sleep.
Not to my knowledge.
Nothing. No. Okay. And can we just talk about what we eat and drink before we go to sleep? Because I've been trying to build a sleep strategy, so to speak. Like not just time to go to sleep. Not just relying on my circadian rhythms to give me some sort of an instinctive boost that Marcus is ready. But thinking about the process, having a process before I go to sleep. And part of that is obviously nighttime is when you eat. So is there any things you recommend not to do, or not to eat, or not to drink, or not to have too much of? And not maybe, should you not have too much water? Because I hear people say, I don't drink water after 6 p.m. That's what they say. Or alternatively, I try not to have too salty a meal because it makes my mouth dry and it keeps me awake. Or I don't drink booze after a certain time. I don't have too much food at night. I try to have my meal before the sun goes down, for argument's sake. Is that just a potpourri of old husbands' tales?
Yeah.
Or is it or is any truth in any of those things in terms of the research that you've been exposed to?
Yeah, I think the water thing is interesting. I mean, it might be depending on how many times you're waking to go to the toilet. If you're waking just once, fine. But if you're waking regularly, you might want to curb that. I mean, I personally have a glass of water before I go to sleep. I think it depends, and no problem. You don't want to eat really too close to bedtime. So, 2 hours before is a good rule of thumb.
Is that because your stomach is too busy digesting your food?
Yeah. And it can be uncomfortable as well, depending on what you eat. If you have a heavy meal, and then try not to eat too big a meal too close to bedtime.
And is one type of food better than another? So in other words, because I've heard people say, I don't eat any protein at night. I only eat carbs before I go to sleep. They go, I'll eat carbs at 6 p.m. I go to sleep at 10 o'clock. I don't eat any protein. I just eat carbohydrates because it makes me sleep better. Does carbs have a greater effect on us in terms of allowing us to sleep, say, compared to proteins, or is there any studies on those sorts of things?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know. I mean, I think there are experiments that look at particular food types and their effects on performance, daytime function, and then sleep. But I do not know protein rich versus carbohydrate rich, and wouldn't, in generalist terms, that isn't advocated as such, in terms of good sleeping habits. That making sure you have this type of food rich meal before sleep. But there might be some literature out there to say that one is better than the other. But
I've heard of it. I don't know
if there's
I've heard both
strong evidence, but
I've heard the arguments for both. And what about things like melatonin? So these days in Australia, you can go off to the pharmacy, and if you're over 55, I think it is, they automatically give you they give you behind-the-counter melatonin, 2 milligrams per tablet in a blister pack of melatonin. You get it without a prescription if you're over 55. And I think the recommended dose is 1 tablet, which is 2 milligrams of melatonin, and they say take it at 6 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever it is. What's the deal with taking melatonin tablet as we get older? Is we producing less? Is our pineal gland producing less melatonin? Is that what happens?
Yeah, and also the time at which that happens also changes with aging. So, like in teenagers, there's a delay in our circadian rhythm. So everyone says teenagers are lazy, they can't get up. Well, of course, it's just that their circadian rhythm has shifted. And then as we get older, it tends to go the other way. So older people tend to go to bed earlier and rise earlier. And so that might be all right.
Good. It's not because we're boring.
It might be all right if you're not working, or that fits with what you want to do, but it might not be.
Yeah.
And so you might want to use light and melatonin to re-entrain your rhythm. I mean, melatonin is interesting, right? If you need to, I take it if I've been traveling time zones, and I find it, it's quite good to take just before I'm ready to go to sleep, and that helps me. But I don't think there's any strong evidence to say that as you get older, you should be taking melatonin. I mean, there's some studies that we're doing at the moment looking at the neuroprotective properties of melatonin, as well as the soporific or the sleep-inducing properties, and a whole host of other neuroprotective agents as well, because we're interested in exploring that aspect of brain health. And
which ones are neuroprotective?
Linked,
Which ones?
Yeah.
Which ones are neuroprotective? Have you got any evidence of anything yet, or anything that's statistically important?
A study's still underway. So inhaled melatonin, so novel ways to deliver drugs to the brain rather than ingesting.
Is that because it's more bioavailable if you take it up through the nose?
So you need much, much smaller dose, but it gets there much more efficient. And then DORAs, so dual orexin receptor antagonists. Okay, so they promote sleep. Right. So orexin is an alerting neurotransmitter. Lots of arousal-inducing neurotransmitters in the brain. Orexin is one of them. And so if you block that, you can bring about sleep. If you activate that, you can promote wakefulness. So orexin agonists being trialled for the treatment of narcolepsy. So
like
the disorder.
modafinil.
Yes.
For example.
Yeah, but different mode of action. But wakefulness promoter.
Yep.
If it's an agonist. But if it's an antagonist, then no. So, and that's also meant to have some neuroprotective properties. So we're exploring that.
The agonist is, or the antagonist?
Antagonist.
Right, yep.
Yeah. And then...
which is probably a reason why people shouldn't be taking modafinil unless they absolutely need it. Because like people take it, I mean, it was originally designed for snipers in the army, modafinil, so they could stay, not fall asleep and stay alert, but at the same time not be spiked like they're on an amphetamine. It's sort of like but it's now since been prescribed for people to study all night, for example. People use it, particularly in the United States. But you can get it here too. Your doctor can prescribe it to you, particularly if you suffer from narcolepsy.
Or shift work disorder.
Shift work, yeah. And but I was reading the other day that something like modafinil can actually be a problem. It can, over time, it can cause a degenerative problem in your brain.
Right.
So you're saying those things that work the opposite to that could be perhaps neuroprotective.
Yes, and indeed even the agonist as well. So it's about understanding what that pathway is, the neurotransmitter, and then what's happening with respect to aging, and then using drugs to target that particular system. And in this case, it happens to be orexin. And then the other thing that's of interest is sleep apnea, really common as you get older. We've talked about CPAP, mandibular advancement splints, positional therapy, lots of approaches. But now, of course, weight loss, but through incretin therapy, so the GLP-1. So these are things like, what's it called? Ozempic.
Ozempic, yeah. To induce weight loss.
To induce weight loss, to therefore reduce the severity of sleep apnea, because obesity is a big risk factor for sleep apnea in middle-aged people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Not so much in older people, but also the properties of that, the GLP-1 drug also showing...
Which is Ozempic. As an example, yeah.
Neuroprotective properties, protecting the heart, protecting the brain. And so some really recent studies showing that when they pulled data from lots of small studies and looked at whether those that received the treatment, the incretin therapy, like Ozempic, and those that didn't, what the risk was of developing all-cause dementia, for example. And some really interesting results supporting what I think the field already knew from animal research, but in humans, that there seems to be some neuroprotective properties as well for that particular agent. So there's lots of stuff happening in the drug sort of intervention space as well. And of course, while it's still about prevention, isn't it? What are the risk factors? What can we do to prevent them? How can we target sleep? And that's our area, that exploring all of these approaches to try and improve the functions of sleep, be it neuromodulation that we talked about, or protecting the brain from the insults that happen during sleep through some of these classes of drugs, is kind of where things are at, where the new stuff is happening now.
It's interesting. Because I don't want anyone who's listening to misinterpret. I think I want to make sure that I got it right.
Yeah.
You're not saying in terms of research that, we get a normal healthy person who's not overweight, everything else is going okay, the heart's good, etc. And they're fit or whatever, but they might be in their 60s. It might be, and you're not saying, we want to see whether Ozempic is neuroprotective for them. I think what you're saying is it's neuroprotective for someone who might be overweight. And by virtue of the fact that Ozempic helps them to lose weight, that it therefore becomes neuroprotective. In other words, there's a correlation between being unfit and unhealthy and the quality of how your brain is operating.
Yeah, so
relative to sleep.
And important to tease that apart.
Yeah.
Obesity, diabetes, known risk factors for neurodegenerative disease,
yep,
are being addressed with this drug.
Yep.
And so if you reduce those risk factors, and indeed sleep apnea, that the outcomes look better. That's from some of the early work.
That's what I was trying to be clear.
Whether the neuroprotective properties exist independently remains to be seen, of course, because you've got all these confounders and all these comorbidities that are in the mix, like with a lot of this research.
Yeah.
Lots of aging research, lots of comorbidities, very hard to tease it all apart. But there appears to be neuroprotective properties
of these things,
anyway.
of these particular drugs.
Yeah. So to be
maybe that's what you're testing. Are you guys looking at this in your research at Macquarie?
We are looking at the DORAs, and we're looking at the melatonin,
Right.
the GLP-1s. Not yet. We've been involved in the GLP-1s for weight loss, for sleep apnea, of course, but not assessing the neuroprotective properties
In its own right.
in its own right.
Wow. So where do you see, like, I mean, I know you're probably a bit hard to say, but do you think in 10 years' time, given the big interest in sleep today, the big interest in exercise and the big interest in nutrition, but there's a big interest in sleep. We never really talked. No one ever talked about sleep before. All of a sudden, everyone's talking about it, including us. Do you think that maybe in 10 years' time, with the research and perhaps more grants and money being allocated to this type of research, that you might be able to squeeze for all of us a few more years of non-neurodegeneration as a result of sleeping better? Do you think that's what you guys are going to come up with? Like, because I'm like, I'm hanging out for this. Like, I haven't got that long to go. So I'm thinking to myself, can you hurry up? But I'm more seriously, do you think in the next 10 years, the speed of this research will start to develop some things that will be neuroprotective?
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're doing it, so that we can give that extra decade of quality of life. That's absolutely why all of this research is taking place. So I think it's that investment in funding, isn't it? Always comes back to that.
Yeah.
So we have research grants, philanthropy that funds our research. We have Centre for Chronic Diseases of Aging. Everything needs to kind of come together to make that happen. But all of the proof of concept type of stuff, some of which I've mentioned today, will then go on, if it's got legs. So I think some of them a bit more established, others are, we need to wait and see. And then it's about accelerating that so that we can translate it, because there's one thing doing the experiments in the sleep laboratory, completely other, which is the end goal, is to translate into new therapies. But that is the long-term goal, to improve brain health, by targeting sleep.
And in the absence of those, call it discoveries, and obviously, they've got to be tested, etc. But in the absence of those, so for the next 10 years, for argument's sake, what is perhaps an optimum, but broad-based, because everyone's going to be individualized, but an optimum strategy that someone should try and adopt in order to take the best advantage of their ability to sleep? So, like, maybe I'll use the word strategy, maybe that is the answer. But what is the way people, let's say they're 60 and over, and they should be thinking about in terms of their sleep patterns? What should they be doing?
Well, I think maybe you need to coin your Mark's healthy sleeping habits. Some of the things that you mentioned earlier are what they should be doing as well.
So I have a strategy.
Thinking about how important sleep is and recognizing that, but not putting too much pressure on yourself, right? Being confident about your sleep, asking for help when there's a problem, and recognizing that. So if you are really suffering in the day, you had poor night's sleep, you've got into a bad habit, that there are approaches to help you get out of that, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's sleep restriction, whatever it might be, or just a better understanding of the sleep process. So you know that if you do have a nap, don't have it too late in the afternoon, have it in the morning, keep it short. Or if you do, know that you're not going to sleep well at night, and that's okay, but you're going to count all of your sleep time.
In a 24-hour cycle.
Yeah. And then avoiding alcohol, don't use it as a way to get to sleep, at least anyway. I think that though it might put you to sleep earlier, like your sleep latency decreases, it disrupts your sleep. It disrupts the second part of the night, and you get kind of a rebound in your sleep. So try not to use the wrong aids, to go to sleep, but just think about going to sleep at the right time. When you've got that sleep pressure and you're working with your circadian rhythm, exercise, nutrition, looking after yourself, being socially involved is also really important. Just general general, ways to stay engaged and to keep active, because the more you do in the day, the more you need your sleep. And, I touched on that a little bit, but that if you're going a long drive or if you're busy working with, listening now and in doing this podcast, that the parts of the brain that you're using a lot, you will have deep sleep in those parts of the brain. So the more active and the more engaged you are, the better your sleep is going to be as well. But just some of those kind of concepts around sleep is just important to know, and know that you're an individual and you don't, what's the general rule might not be the rule for you.
So I think what you're sort of saying, that I'll interpret that as a non-doctor, is that non-scientifically as well. I would say, I think what you're saying is be aware of yourself. Just don't plod along and just never think about it, but don't be aware of it. In other words, don't let it dominate your life, but be aware of it. And for me, once I have awareness, then you've got to do something about it. You've got to have a strategy. It might mean don't drink water after 6 p.m.
Yeah.
It might not. But just try things out on yourself over a period of time. It's not going to not happen overnight, but try things out over a period of time. What works for you best, because we're all individuals and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to anybody else or the population out there.
Yeah.
What works best for you? Try different things. There are some things which are non-negotiable. In other words, too much booze and blah, 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 too much stimulation. They're pretty obvious. But what this means is engage with yourself and have the strategy, but then probably most importantly, execute on it. Be consistent with your execution, and you'll know over time when any little nuances happen and something happens to you that night, or either good or bad, you either slept better or you didn't sleep better. Note that and build that back into your strategy. So it's sort of like you're reviewing your strategy over months, and maybe over a couple of months' time, you can actually get your strategy that works for you at that time. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Have a strategy.
Strategy, and then some other things to add to that strategy. So waking up at the same time is more important than going to bed at the same time. So the regularity of sleep has been shown to be important. So not having sleeping patterns that are all over the place. Thinking about your environment. Is it cool enough? Temperature is really important. Is it dark enough?
Temperature being cooler.
Cooler. You don't want to be too hot, and, very hard to sleep when it's really hot. But thinking about those dark and light cues and how that modulates how that affects your body clock, your internal body clock.
So don't have the telly on when you go to sleep. Don't have a light blaring.
Keep the bedroom, for sleeping and intimacy. Don't watch TV. Don't be on your phone in there. Like keep that out of the bedroom. You don't want to, if you can't sleep, don't lie there. If after 15, 20 minutes, get up, go and do something. Don't go and go on your phone, but go and do something else. So there are some strategies that you can do to promote your sleep. And then importantly, as you mentioned, if you have a bad night, understand why that was, but don't beat yourself up about it. Just, okay, today is another day.
But try not to repeat whatever it was that you think was a variance that actually made you have that crappy night.
Yeah.
Or try to at least think about, but I drank that whiskey at 10 o'clock and I woke up at 1 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect example. And then that's the reason why that you have this wake rebound with alcohol. It's out of your system now, and you're going to have second part of your sleep going to be awful. And then the other thing, as you get older and you're taking more medications, so something like more than a third of older Australians over 70 have more than 5 medications, so polypharmacy. And so if you think about the interactions of all those medications that they might have on your sleep, it might also be important to think about what else, not just about your environment, but what else is happening with your other aspects of your health, or the interactions of those medications, and seeking review with your GP. And then importantly, if you're having problems with your sleep chronically, seek some professional help.
That's interesting, though, because beginning of this year, I had an accident, and I tore some muscles and tendons in a sensitive area in my glute, and when I try to sleep, I go to sleep no problem, but maybe 4 or 5 hours in, it would start to ache, and it would wake me up.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I didn't do anything about it. So basically put up with this for a month or so. Then I thought, I've got to get this fixed. So I then went and saw an orthopedic surgeon, and who sorted it out for me over a period of time. Now I don't have those aches and pains, and I sleep like 100 times better. Not perfect, but 100 times much better. So I think the point that you're trying to make is, that you have made, is that be aware of what's going on in your life. Maybe you're a man over 60 and you have to get up at 3 times to go to the bathroom in the night because your prostate, you might have benign prostate hyplasia, which means go to your doctor or go to the urologist and get a prescription for whatever it is that he recommends that might help relieve that prostate issue. Because as we get older, there's always something that's getting in the way.
Yep.
And you can't have a sleep strategy if there's a roadblock being pushed in front of you all the time. Recognize the roadblock, because like most men, I don't know about women, but most men that I know, we get dramas and we just don't do anything about it. I'm one of them. It'll be right. And then I just suffer the drama. And but these days I now recognize the drama, and I go and see somebody about it and get it addressed as best I can. And generally speaking, lucky the way medicine is these days, is usually something that can address nearly everything, but especially when it affects your sleep, you must get it addressed. And I think that's a really important point for people to take home. We don't need to not sleep properly because we're overweight, or we need a mask and we refuse to wear one, or we can't wear one, but we haven't sought any advice as to what we can do in as an alternative. Or we've got an injury that's causing us to wake, or we've got a condition that's causing us to wake often, or we're just doing self-inflicted issues like we're drinking too much, or we're eating the wrong foods. We eat a whole lot of crap or something before we go to bed, or we're eating right up until the moment we go to bed. We're eating chocolates and biscuits or whatever. These are easy fixes, but we just got to be prepared to do it.
Yep.
And it goes right back to where I started. We've got to have a strategy. We've got a strategy around exercise. We all go to the gym knowing I'm going to do these exercises because I want to build those muscles and keep this strong and have this heart. So I'm going to do this on this day, something else another day. Another day I'm going to run, another day I'm going to swim, another day I'm going to do yoga and stretching. We have these exercise strategies, and we definitely know our food strategies because we all know what we should and shouldn't eat. But no one's ever thought about sleep strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And lots of those things you can address in and pain.
Most of them you can fix.
Really, yeah. And it might not be about multiple medications, just one.
Yeah.
And just understanding, that might be the reason why. And is there other alternatives to manage whatever that condition is? And you're right, as we all get older, there's things that are going to go wrong that needs to be managed. And it's just about how that manages.
And that's up to us.
Yeah.
No one else is going to do it for you. You've got to take control. Like the problem in this country, and probably other countries, and you can opine on this in relation to the country you come from, but in England, but it seems like when we have problems, we don't do anything about it because we always expect our GP to fix our problems. We don't take control of our life, our own health. Now, sure, like if I've got I've got a chest infection, I have to go to the doctor. The doctor has to take control of that. But these day-to-day things like health, exercise, sleep, exercise, nutrition, the doctor's not going to control that. That's up to us. And that's what this show's about, by the way, is to be able to bring people like you onto the show and explain to everybody, how important sleep is and thinking about the process of your sleeping. And you've just explained a whole lot of stuff to us. Some of which most of us will understand, some of which some of us won't really understand, but it doesn't matter. We're not meant to understand everything that you understand. But at least you're bringing awareness to the program. That's like critical for I think, for Australians to control or take control of their own health. Medicare's not going to do it. Government's not going to do it. Your GP's too busy looking after patients. He or she's not going to do it. Your husband and wife's not going to do it. Your kids aren't going to do it. You have to do it. And it is pretty confusing out there, though. Like somebody might be going and listening to a whole lot of different, people talk about sleep and various other things. But the idea of this show is to sort of relate it back to people over 50, say in my case. I'm a little bit more than 50, but just people just slightly over 50. So, and this is very specific. So I'm really appreciate you coming in today, Angela. I think that, and I'm definitely coming into your clinic to do the nighttime sleep test.
Wonderful.
I don't know how I'm going to sleep with all these things stuck to my head and everything. But
everyone says that, but they do.
They do.
Yeah.
Eventually, when all these things align, my tiredness and the accumulation, whatever the chemical is in your brain that you accumulate when you're getting tired, and my my circadian rhythms, when they all align, eventually I'll fall asleep for sure.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to tell me how big my waves are. But I'm looking forward to that. I really do look forward to that. And we'll film that and we'll share the outcomes with everybody. It's not for everybody to go and try, but I'm fortunate enough to be in a position to do it. But I think people need to start to get their heads around this stuff.
Yeah.
Life exists beyond your GP. Not putting any down on the GP, but life exists beyond that. Life exists way beyond that stuff, and we must take control. So, Dr. Angela de Rosario, thanks very much for coming on to talk to us.
Thanks very much.